let's take a look at an example of changes of character, breaks of structure, trending markets, and how it all applies to supply and demand and everything in between. We're going to use Euro US dollar as an example, and what we can see here on Euro US dollar is prices was in a downtrend. We're seeing lower lows, lower highs, lower lows, and lower highs. And as price begins to push down, we can see that there are a series of supply zones that have been created, and price has tested into them and continued moving to the downside. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig into two examples here and here of changes of character and what we'd be looking for as price taps into those zones. So let's go to the 15-minute chart. We'll look at the first example. The first example on the 15-minute chart is a little bit harder to depict, or more specifically, it's a larger shift in structure. But what we can see is leading up to it, price was making higher highs and higher lows. Created the highest high, and our expectation if price was to continue in a bull trend would be that price would print some sort of higher high, more than likely at a demand zone, and then move to the upside, creating a higher high. But what we can see is price actually broke the previous higher low and continued to make a lower low. This would be our change of character right here. This is what creates the lower low. And once we break that lower low and print a lower high and a new lower low, we've now confirmed a bearish trend. So then we can just take a look and just see price continuing to move to the downside. And what we can see, if I just go back up to, say, a daily chart, is we have a pivot created demand zone, and we can see as price has now reacted off of that pivot created demand. We'll go back down to the 15-minute chart. And what I said in the theory video is that what we're looking for is price to tap into a higher time frame supply or demand zone, and then we'd be looking for a change of character, and that would frame up our overall trade idea. What we can see if we're looking here on the 15-minute chart, we'll look at it in the lens of supply and demand, because I also said that we can apply market structure and supply and demand to get a better understanding of changes of character. So if we're looking at the 15-minute, what we can see is we've broken this low, we've created this lower low, and our previous high is right here. So basically what that means is price is trading within this range, and based on market structure, we're trading in a bear trend. So what we'd be expecting if the bear trend is to continue, we'd be expecting some sort of lower high to be printed, and for price to then continue, break this low, and then form a new lower low. And two spots that we would more than likely look for potential lower highs to form would be in this supply zone or this supply zone, just looking here on the 15-minute chart. What we can see is price in its own right slightly respects the supply zone, but what we can see is we do have a break of that supply zone, and as annotated here, supply fails and higher time frame demand is respected. This is the first indication of a change of character. If we are to go down to, say, a 1-minute chart and look at the market structure, we would more than likely see a more clean-cut change of character down here with the break of structure here and a break of structure to the upside, showing a bearish move and then a bullish change of trend, and then we can see price continuing on to the upside. And then finally, what we'll do on the 15-minute here is just look at this particular bit of price action, because what we can see on the 15-minute chart is that price is now tapped into this supply zone. So what we'd be looking for is this low to get broken. That would be our change of character, because up until that point, we are still very much bullish. And once that low here, this higher low, is broken, we get a retrace and then another move to the downside. We have a confirmed downtrend starting, which means price is in fact respecting this supply zone. We're going to take this one a step further, and we're going to go down to the 1-minute time frame and just dig into the market structure from a change of character perspective. So what I can do, just to speed up the process just a little bit, I'm going to tap on 1-minute structure here, and what we can see very clearly is that price is making a series of higher highs and higher lows up into this supply zone. What we can see is we've tapped into the supply zone, and what we can see, if I just zoom in just a little bit more, we're going to look at it in one of two ways. And the reason we're going to look at it in one of two ways is just factoring in the overall fractal nature of the markets, and then more 1-minute focused here, because of course anything less than 1 minute, we're in the seconds time frame. Seconds time frame are incredibly quick, they're incredibly noisy or seemingly noisy, so we don't like to, or we don't necessarily recommend going lower than that. But what we can see is we create this higher high, we have this higher high, our higher low would be here. This is the lowest point that then creates this higher high being created. What we can see, and we'll touch on this later in the liquidity series is we have equal highs, and we've now swept those equal highs. If we're looking at the last key point of structure on a more fractal time frame, or simply just substructure, what we can see is we have this low right here. Price breaks this low. We have this supply zone right here. Price is showcasing a change of character. This would be a potential first entry based on this substructure. And what we could also look at is this would be the second or more confirmed entry based on this initial change of character and then breaking true structure. Or if we're just going to look at 1 minute structure, we're going to disregard this as a structural point on the 1 minute. We're not going to look at substructure. We're going to look at pure market structure, understanding that the lowest point is the more probable point of structure to use. What we can see is we break structure to the downside, we form a lower low, because if we were to be continuing this series of higher highs and higher lows, we would expect to react off of some sort of demand, whether it be this demand zone here or something that is in worth here. And what we can see is we did have a demand here. We reacted off that demand, and then demand ultimately failed. We then put in a lower low, which would then be our change of character, switching the trend from bullish to bearish. What we can see is we have a supply zone. Price reacts off of that. So now we're seeing demand failing and supply being respected. We have a change of character. We switch from bullish to bearish, and we're seeing price continuing to the downside. And then what we can see, if we just continue on, we can see price now forming a series of lower lows and lower highs. And as it currently stands, the market has just barely broken this low point right here. And then what we can see is then again, if I just draw on this very quickly. So we have our lowest low here. Price then breaks that structure to the downside, and our previous high would be right here. So what we're doing now is we're still in a downtrend, and what we can see is we've created a lower low. But now if we just backtrack, throw this on, we can see that price is now starting to create a change of character to the upside potentially. As we can see, we've now broken this previous lower high. So we have a lower high, lower low, lower low. But now we're starting to see a potential higher high. But one of the things we need to ask ourselves when we are breaking market structure, whether it's a break of structure or a change of character, is what happens after we break that structure. We can see that we broke this previous lower high and we basically rolled right over. We can see that this is a supply zone, but more specifically, if we were to draw a supply zone from this wick, again referring to the supply and demand zone video from episode 4, what we can see if we just clean that off is we have still a respect of supply. Now, one thing we would look at to validate if this is in fact a change of character to the upside, we'd be looking at points of demand that would likely hold this. So what we can see is we have a range right here. So a first shot would be, does the range hold? And what we have is a inside bar here or a pivot that we can use for demand as well. So we have a couple points that we can validate our bull trend idea, but overall, this is where market structure comes into play. We then look at the overall structure that we're seeing here on a higher time frame. And what we can see is we are bullish, but we've tapped into a higher time frame point of interest. But again, now we're starting to see a change of character on the 4 hour. If we then combine that with the daily chart, we can still see that we are bearish, but we're reacting off of a higher time frame point of interest. So this is where we've built into all of these different components. If we're going to start respecting demand, which we have been, again, if we go to the daily chart, you can see we've respected daily demand. If we go to the 4 hour chart, we've respected that daily demand. We've seen a change of character on the 4 hour, so we're starting to see that more in our favor. We go to the 15-minute chart. We are now creating a series of higher highs and higher lows on the 15-minute chart. We are, of course, now reacting off of a 15-minute supply point. So if we just go back to the 4 hour, we can see that price broke structure here. This is a valid supply zone. But again, like I've said in every video at this point, supply and demand zones are more than likely going to get a reaction, but it's the follow through that we're more interested in. Again, we're looking at the higher time frame. We're reacting off of a daily point of interest or daily demand zone currently, but we've come from a very large downtrend. The 4 hour has seen a change of character. But again, one thing that we want to see with a change of character is a higher low being formed. We want to break that higher high and form a new higher high, because once we get two higher highs formed in a market, and what we could say is this is actually beginning to form a bull trend, or what we would be expecting to see of a bull trend. So this would give us more confirmation. But again, we can use the lower time frame, we can use the price action on those lower time frames to build up trade ideas and understand what's happening here on the charts. Because what we can see is we do have a demand zone right here. We have this pivot demand, and price is currently sitting within it. But of course, we're starting to just more or less sit within it. We look at the lower time frame order flow, and we're starting to see price is struggling at this point. We can even refine it more specifically to this 1 minute demand zone right here, this inside bar. And what we can see is this is the more or less pinnacle moment where price tapped into it and then began to move to the upside. And what we've seen is another change of character and a move to the upside. So if we were to follow through, this would be the starting more than likely of this. But of course, we have a couple more points that we can look at. Of course, I'm going into a few more things. Really, at the end of the day, we're focusing on changes of character, and this is what we're starting to see. But of course, like I said, we have a change of character here, but does that mean we're just going to start moving to the upside and starting a bull trend? Not necessarily. We need to start putting in more confirmations from the higher time frame, start building up the idea and understanding ultimately what we're trying to gain from these charts. And by doing that, we're combining supply and demand, we're combining market structure, we're trying to understand where price is showing us from a market structure perspective and what supply and demand is telling us. Is demand being respected and supply failing? At this point, we're seeing demand being respected here on the 15-minute chart, supply failing, supply failing. So now what we're left with, if we look at this supply failure, and I'll draw it on with a rectangle just so we can see it a little bit more clearly. We have supply failing here, and we have supply failing right here. And what does that give us? We now have flip zones where demand is being created at these points in time. We have a pivot demand and another pivot demand with an inside bar that we can refine our demand zone on, that we can now start to look for demand being respected to ultimately take out this supply if we are to start an uptrend. And based on what we're seeing here, we're seeing supply failing and demand being respected. That starts to begin to make more sense as we continue on here on euro dollar. But that's basically the overall understanding of the change of character, how we then can apply it to supply and demand zones, how we can combine it with overall market structure, and how we start to look for trades. Again, we're going to dig into this a lot deeper. I probably went a little bit more detail than I really needed to necessarily, but we're starting to piece together a lot of the more exciting and powerful components of our strategy, and the change of character really begins to piece everything together when we're looking at the overall trend. So I hope that this video was helpful in conveying the change of character, what we're looking for ideally on the higher time frame down to the lower time frame, combining supply and demand, and gives you a little bit more of a picture of where we're going with the videos that we're putting out here in the Refined series.